Terminal.
RCP chamber pressure looks good.
Doubling up. Roger roll, Atlantis.
Water towers, fly!
Tango Delta nominal.
Fighting outside feed off. Bring in feed off. Off.
Yikes. You bet. Okay. We don't need any more of these.
Well, what do we have here? If my eyes do not deceive me, there's a frost ring on Booster 7 down at Starbase, Texas. So I guess we gotta come out here and talk and see what the heck is going on. Hello, everybody. My name is Thomas Burkhart, news director here at NASASpaceflight, and offering some commentary for what appears to be a propellant load test on Booster 7 down at the orbital launch site in Starbase. SpaceX gearing up for a semi-soon orbital/suborbital. We can have that debate here later if you want. The big test flight of the Starship and Super Heavy coming up in the coming weeks, hopefully, and it appears that they are working through that campaign, including a prop load test today. Let me know if you can hear me in chat. Let me see if we got some 5x5s, because I know you all know what to do. And yes, there they are. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. It's not going to just be me on voice commentary, whatever the word is, for today's coverage. We've also got Alex on comms. Alex, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I was actually here sort of looking at the things, very concentrated and seeing how's the timeline for today. Very interesting.
Yeah, well, I know we've got a bunch of people who are going to be looking at this and looking at all the different signs to try to figure out what exactly is going on, and we'll get into what we know here in just a second. I do want to introduce a third voice rounding out our commentary team, though, as well. Ian Atkinson is on comms with us today. Ian, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Excited to see some more testing ahead of the orbital flight.
Sounds great, Ian. Also, a big thank you to Mr. Michael Baylor, who is operating today's stream. So thank you, Michael, for your support. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. As of course, we'll be taking your questions over the course of our live coverage. So, got a question about what's going on? Please tag us at NASA Spaceflight in chat, and we'll pull as many of those questions in as we can. And just thank you to everyone who sends support our way as well. It's a super chat or tips, things like that. We greatly appreciate it. But for now, let's start off with a status update of what is going on in Starbase. We've got subcoolers when active earlier. We saw the launch mount go into what we call waterfall mode, basically venting from the launch mount. And now we've got frost on the vehicle. So, Alex, can you give us a rundown of what we've seen happen so far and what that tells us about what they might be doing today?
Yeah, so they went into the usual closure and clearing of the launch pad and everything. We saw we saw first the chopsticks go up and around the booster. Then they did a little bit of a wiggly test with the grid fins. Then the tank farm spooled up, and they went into propellant load. We usually see that OLM vent going on for liquid oxygen. There's a few people confused because, hey, there's frost, but the OLM vent is ongoing. Yeah, but the frost is on the methane tank, and the OLM is related with a chilling in of the liquid oxygen lines to the orbital launch mount. So those are separated and obviously not connected to each other. So once we see that OLM vent stop, maybe that'll be the start of the liquid oxygen load on booster 7. But for now, they're loading methane onto the booster, and we know it's methane because the methane subcoolers are active today. So that's part of the process today, where both the liquid oxygen side and the liquid methane side both went active as the tank farm spooled up.
There we go. Yeah, thank you. And we've definitely seen other commodities get loaded into the methane tank. So the tank you see getting frosty right now is the methane tank, but we've seen them load that with nitrogen before. If you're just doing a leak check of that tank or just a cryogenic test, it doesn't have to be the actual propellant. But based on the GSE that has been spooled up, it is in fact methane. Not seeing any. Have we seen any sign on the liquid oxygen side of things, either with GSE or on the vehicle itself?
Well, right now you're kind of seeing at the right side here a lot of venting from the ground tanking and all the subcoolers and everything. That's actually the liquid oxygen side. It is very venting like crazy right now. But obviously, although the subcoolers are still active, the OLM vent is still going. So there's obviously some chilling on those pipes just now, so they cannot load, like they cannot really do both at the same time. If the oil vent is going, there's obviously things that are going outboard from the GSC, so you cannot really load anything into the vehicle. Once that vent is closed, then everything can just go into the vehicle. So it's a bit of both things cannot happen at the same time. The same occurs when they drain back. So when they drain back, they use the same pipes that they use for loading the vehicle. And so if they're draining the propellants back and there's that oil and vent going on, that means that it's not ongoing. It cannot go at the same time. That's what I wanted to refer to. There you go.
Gotcha. So no liquid oxygen activity right now. But the orbital launch mount continues to vent, so they're still chilling down some of the ground lines. And we're seeing that frost ring on the methane tank still rise a bit, so we'll keep an eye on how high that gets, if they're going to load the whole tank or it'll be a partial load. There's a lot of possibilities of what exactly they could be aiming to achieve today. Let's talk about what we know it isn't. We're getting a couple questions in chat asking if there is an overpressure notice, and the answer to that is no. We have not received a notice for a warning of a potential overpressure event. Those notices go out when they're doing an engine ignition test. So we know that's not a static fire test. That is also corroborated by the fact that they have not loaded liquid oxygen, because you would need both propellants to start the engines anyway. But we're not expecting a static fire today. Correct me if I'm wrong, in theory, they could do a spin prime test. Like, that does not get ruled out by a lack of overpressure notice, right?
Yeah, the overpressure notices are needed mostly for static fires. We've seen them do like send overpressure notices and then spin prime tests, but not all spin prime tests need an overpressure notice, because there's this sort of feeling that after the explosion, the thinking that after the explosion that they had last year on July, that after that they need overpressure notices for every single spin prime. We've seen moments where they have sent overpressure notices and they've done a spin prime test, but not all spin prime tests that they've done since then have had an overpressure notice. So there doesn't seem to be a relationship between both. It's very likely that what they did was they sent overpressure notices to do a spin prime and static fire test, probably on the same day, but they only were able to do the spin prime, and so that's the only thing that we saw. That is sort of the theory right now that we kind of have, given the things that we've seen.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you for clarifying that. Of course, we're going to keep an eye on all the things that are happening with today's test, and every vent, every frost ring that shows up, every cloud of vapor gives us a clue as to what else they might be doing. Because this is a test, SpaceX does not provide any official information as to what they might be doing today, unless Elon decides to tweet about it. So we are limited to informed speculation based on what we are seeing. Also, getting a couple people in chat pointing out that the thumbnail was wrong. I believe that should be fixed now. We, of course, spooled this stream up as quickly as possible once the testing got started, and I think we grabbed the thumbnail from the booster live stream that was earlier. But we do not. That should be fixed now. So thank you for pointing that out, chat. All right, getting into some more questions and things. Also want to thank people who send support our way. Chris W. offered a gifted Red Team membership. So Chris W., thank you so much for that support. Memberships are a great way to send support. You can also do a super chat. We also have the tips, tip jar. I believe it's tips.nasasspaceflight.com if you want to support us that way as well. Greatly appreciated anyone who helps us do what we do. So let's get into some questions here. Of course, this is part of the... Oh, here's a good one. About today's testing, Adrian asks... I don't think it's our Adrian. I think it's a different Adrian. Says, why are they only loading the methane tank? I thought they had to fill both tanks so as to prevent the vehicle from collapsing under unbalanced loads. Ian, talk to us a little bit about why that sometimes is a factor, but why we might not be worried about it today.
Yes, there's a few reasons why we might not need to be worried too much about them just filling the methane tank right now. First off, and possibly the most likely option, they may have just started loading the methane tank first and may start loading liquid oxygen soon after. Alternatively, if they're only loading the methane tank today, it seems as of right now it's only a partial load unless they're going to continue going all the way up. If it's only a partial load, then it can withstand the pressure of that methane without collapsing the liquid oxygen tank. But in addition, it seems that this booster is is still hooked up to the chopsticks, which would provide a good amount of support to keep the booster upright and supported. So in theory, they might be able to load a little bit more liquid methane into the upper tank.
They
Go
are
ahead.
actually not connected to the chopsticks. The chopsticks
Really?
are close, but they are not on the pins of the booster.
You're
We kind of
right.
had a
Yes.
view before of the chopsticks, and like they're really really close, but it's not actually like the booster is not actually on the chopsticks.
No, you're right. You could see it's just below the pins right now, but yes. So if they're only loading liquid methane, they'll likely just load a little bit into the tank. If they choose to not go ahead with liquid oxygen loading as well.
Yeah, and one thing I would like to point out here, so it seems like methane loading has stopped. We haven't seen that line rise up not much in the past few minutes, and OLM vent has stopped, so maybe that indicates we're going to see liquid oxygen loading underway soon.
Yeah, methane load, and again, they've only reached a partial methane load, which is
Mhm.
a good way to if you're just testing like your ground piping and the connections between the booster and things. There's no reason to sit there for the entire time. If it's working and you're getting the partial fill load, that's probably enough, and you don't have to spend even more time to just fill the tank entirely, because then you got to drain the tank entirely, and you just eat up more time that you could be spending working on other stuff around the launch site. Because again, you got to clear the site for these tests and things like that. So could be a partial load, and maybe they could add a partial liquid oxygen load here shortly based on that vent stopping. So we'll keep an eye out for signs of that.
I just did some quick A/B testing just to chime in, and they are still continuing with the methane load. As of about 2 minutes ago, it has risen quite a bit. So seems they're going ahead with that. And like Alex said, the waterfall vent has stopped, so they may be going ahead with liquid oxygen loading now too. And the GSE for liquid oxygen is going crazy right now. So
Right, yeah. I mean, that huge cloud of vapor to the right side of the screen, right?
yes.
Mhm.
All right, let's see. That's the big thing. If frost starts to appear at the very bottom of the rocket, that'll be our sign that liquid oxygen load is indeed underway. That'll be our confirmation. But in the meantime, let's get another question here. Well, this is a relative question, but we should talk about it. Victorillo does point out that the Artemis 2 crew has been revealed. If anyone was tuned in to NASA TV just about an hour ago, we were covering over on Twitter and things like that. But the crew of Artemis 2 was announced. The commander is, hold on, I'm going to get all the names in front of me so I don't mess it up. I believe it was Reed Wiseman is your commander. There we go. NASA's Reed Wiseman, he flew on a Soyuz mission before to the International Space Station. His second spaceflight will be the command of Artemis 2. The pilot of Artemis 2 is going to be NASA's Victor Glover. You may remember him flying as the pilot on SpaceX Crew 1, the first operational commercial crew mission on SpaceX Crew Dragon. And then two mission specialists, one from NASA, Christina Cook, who has spent almost a year on the International Space Station, and then from Canada, Jeremy Henson, a rookie astronaut who will be making his first ever spaceflight on Orion on Artemis 2. So if you didn't see that announcement earlier, that crew will of course be paying a lot of attention to Starship as well, because the Artemis program is looking to Starship architecture to support lunar landing, starting with Artemis 3. So a lot of eyes on these tests, not just within SpaceX, but around the American space
Oh,
program.
we have frost on the liquid oxygen tank.
Oh, yep, there
Liquid
we go.
oxygen load. Excellent.
So, yep, both propellants now being loaded onto the vehicle. We'll keep an eye on if that methane ring continues to grow as well.
You can visibly see the liquid oxygen frost ring growing.
Yeah, that is growing very quickly, actually. So, folks, on the left-hand side view, there's like a ring of stringers, kind of a less smooth area on the bottom of the booster, and right on the top of that, you see the frost ring growing. And literally, if you watch it from this view, the frost is visibly growing in front of us. It's like watching frost grow. It sounds like something that should be insanely boring, but you can see it moving visibly.
It's like watching grass grow, but even better.
But except it grows much faster.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, there we go. There's our answer as to what they're doing right now.
Mhm.
And as
let's
for
have,
A/B testing, they are
Oh.
still loading liquid methane right now.
Okay. Also seeing some vapors form on the outside. That's going to be it's not like a leak or anything. That's the air being so cold in contact with the booster that it starts to condense and vapors form. Perfectly expected. All right. I'm going to bring in some more questions, but again, keep calling out if you see new things develop as propellant load continues. Bean is asking about the chopsticks. Why do they have them around the booster? We know they're not actually connected, though, which is interesting. So any guesses as to why the boosters are in that position? Or the chopsticks, excuse me. Not boosters. There's only one booster.
Super heavy.
It might
no.
the chopsticks
Don't
may
give
just
them
be there.
ideas.
The chopsticks might just be there just to keep them stored there. There's not really anywhere for them to go. I mean, you could bring them lower and then spread them out more, but doesn't seem to really be any advantage to doing that. So just keep them there and then have them ready for when you need to lift Ship 24 on top sometime soon, hopefully.
And for previous engine testing, again, I know we're not expecting a static fire because there's no overpressure notice or anything. But for static fire testing, I believe they had the chopsticks up there but wide open, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is not the chopstick position associated with engine testing either, just for everyone's awareness. Yeah, let me bring in some more questions and things. We also have some support coming in. Cola Games with a $20 tip. So thank you so much, Cola Games, for the support. Greatly appreciate that. Had some guy that's seriously the name. That's the username, I promise. Became a Capcom member. So some guy, thank you for your support. And then Greg with a question: is part of the liquid oxygen tank obscured by the orbital launch mount? Thanks for the unexpected live stream. I mean, we're seeing the bottom of the frost ring, and obviously there's a dome underneath, so we don't see the very, very bottom of the tank. But I don't believe the launch mount obscures any of the tank walls because we're seeing the bottom of the frost ring there. The only part obscured is like the engine section, right?
Yep.
And we'll see if they do move into something like spin prime testing or something like that. We'll obviously see the exhaust from that underneath the launch mount. So it shouldn't obscure anything too important regarding whatever their testing may be today. All right, question here from Hiccup. We're into the speculation zone, so Alex and Ian, have fun with this one. Do we think we can get an FAA license this week? Alex, you get to go first because your name is first, alphabetical order.
Oh boy. Do I think? I mean, it's a possibility, yes, but I don't know. I don't think when we're gonna get it. I just hope we get it soon, yes, but we'll see. We don't really know. We don't have any information, so that's sort of like, I don't know, like asking me if I will see a star go supernova or something. Like, I don't know. I have no information, so maybe.
What we'll know is we'll get it before the orbital launch occurs. So I guess that's our upper bound. Of course, when that launch is happening is the big question mark. And as propellant load testing on this test does continue with both of the tanks continuing to rise, the frost rings on those tanks continuing to rise. Our next question here, or another message that says, I have heard that the launch may be between the 6th and 12th of this month, and I believe that is based on a tweet from none other than Alex here, because Alex found the notice to mariners, the marine hazard zones that were expected to be associated with this launch. However, the dates are subject to change, right?
Yeah, and it is very important as well. What I kind of followed up on the next tweets, that as they come here with the vehicles and do all the final pre-checks and everything and do the stacking and the last minor checks and tests, and here with the GSC, the vehicles, and all the regulatory approvals and everything, that window is not final. That is not the end all be all. There's going to be probably more cancellations of these notices and new ones releasing, and we've seen that on previous test flights of the hops, even going back to Starhopper. We saw it as well, that this is a cycle that we're going to see over the next few weeks. And maybe some people will lose patience, but you gotta have it, because this is the home stretch of this flight. We've waited for 2 years already since they were like, hey, we're gonna launch soon to orbit, and we're not there yet, but we're definitely, probably this month, it's probably gonna be that.
Famous last words, but also I hope you are correct.
Well, within the month, let's say. Okay. Next 4 weeks.
Hedge a little bit more. There you go. All right. Let's see what else we've got here. Here's a good question from Kane asking, is this a faster fill than on other tests?
It looks pretty much like the previous ones.
Yeah, it looks a lot like it. It just looked faster on that camera because we had a close-up view. But I mean,
Mm.
looking at this wide-angle camera showing the whole booster, it looks relatively. It looks like it's not even changing at all. So I don't think this is like a super fast fill.
You could say it's a glacier
Oh,
growth because it's cold, you know? Okay.
Great. Alright. Shut it down. No, I'm kidding.
in other news, in A/B testing, they are still loading propellants.
Still loading. Both frost rings definitely. I mean, you can see that methane tank is coming up on almost half full at this point. Liquid oxygen got a long way to go. There is much larger of a liquid oxygen tank, and that's because you consume more liquid oxygen than methane while the engine burns, so the LOX tank is slightly bigger. Let me see what other questions we've got here. Here's a good question on the topic of Artemis and Starship's involvement. What is SpaceX doing to work on the HLS for Artemis? I'm not very well versed with what SpaceX is doing. So right now, their focus is going to be on the more generic Starship vehicle, right? The vehicles that's going on these first test flights to prove the overall architecture. Because HLS, the Human Landing System, is basically a variant of the Starship upper stage. The booster will be exactly the same, but they'll be able to launch a version outfitted with airlocks, a crew cabin, a slightly different propulsion system for landing on the moon. It'll have solar panels and the things you need to not just land on the moon, but also get there and then operate on the surface for a set amount of time to support the crew while they're there. Starting with Artemis 3, preceded by an uncrewed test flight ahead of that. But right now, I mean, am I correct to say that they're mostly focusing on the more generic Starship vehicle? And once that test flight is underway, we might be able to expect to see more HLS specific hardware as they prepare for those specific test flights?
Yeah, probably. I mean, we did see, probably like a year and a half ago, they had or about 2 years ago, actually, they made a sort of mock-up nose cone for the HLS lander. It ended up, they didn't really end up using it. Oh, we see some venting there from the liquid oxygen
Yeah, I
tank.
wanted to point it out. So there's some venting from the top of the liquid oxygen tank. It's about the middle of the booster. And that's a pretty extended vent. Sometimes, and there it goes, it stops right as I say that. Sometimes you vent a tank while you're propellant loading, so you remove pressure in the tank and it becomes easier to pump propellants in. Sometimes you also vent a tank when you are done testing and you are depressurizing. Obviously, there's plenty of propellant on board, and that wasn't super prolonged vent, so probably just maintaining the correct pressures for propellant load, if I had to guess.
Very cool. Nice camera there. Yeah, you can see the chopsticks are spread out a bit. They're not attached.
Right, yeah, they're there, but not like attached firmly.
And there's a certain vehicle in the background there.
Ship 24.
Ship
Just
24.
watching.
Soon.
Soon, he said.
Soon. I wonder if it's getting nervous, just like watching its ride. Just like, oh, that's my ride. Better work well.
Alright, let's see what else we've got here. Sepsep says, question about this Artemis and Starship collaboration. If NASA plans to use Starship for the lunar landing, would they be calling it Artemis 3, or is it something else? Yeah, so it's part of the Artemis 3 mission. Now, ahead of that, there's going to be an uncrewed landing demonstration. I don't know what the exact mission name is going to be with that, but they'll send a Starship human landing system variant to do the full landing on the moon, but without docking with an Orion first and getting crew and going down. And then once they demonstrate that, the next mission will be the Artemis 3 landing, which is a test flight for a crewed moon landing. So it is part of the Artemis 3 mission, yes. All right, here is a question. Sravan asks, could this be a test of lifting the booster with some propellant to simulate the chopsticks holding a booster after a catch attempt? Now, I'm going to offer my speculation first, and then I'm going to open it up to Alex and Ian here. This is more propellant than would be on a booster after, like, a landing, what is effectively a landing. You would land with almost no fuel left, so I don't think the propellant load levels line up with that as a guess. Well, I don't know. What do you guys think?
I would agree with that. I think if you land with this much propellant in your tank, you had a very light mission, and it was very not optimized for Starship.
Right.
So you should be landing, like Thomas said, with minimal amounts of propellants. There will be some propellant in there, because you really don't want to run your engines dry. That destroys your engines.
Mhm.
So there will be like a minuscule amount of propellants in there, but compared to the dry mass of the booster, it's really just going to be like pennies. It's not going to really matter.
Yeah, in terms
You
of
don't.
propellant,
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was about to say that in terms of propellant, by the time it lands, you should see only propellant inside of the liquefaction header tank of the booster, which is inside of the main tank, and also the methane that is used for landing. It's probably going to be only on the transfer tube and probably the bottom of the bulkhead, rather than, as we see there, it's almost half full. So that's a lot.
Yeah, there you go. And you don't actually want to land with excess propellant. Like if you have a super light mission for whatever reason, you will still burn the first stage however long you needed so that the boost pack and landing burns work out to land with almost minimal propellant. You would much rather have your upper stage have the excess propellant at the end of your mission, because as that booster falls back through the atmosphere, if it is extra heavy with extra propellant on board, the aerodynamics on the way down will slow down the booster less, and you'll actually need to use even more propellant. And sometimes that can be so heavy that it actually prevents booster landing from being possible at all, because there's not enough aerodynamic drag to slow down a heavier booster. So on a lighter mission, or a mission going to just a low Earth orbit that doesn't use all of Starship's capability, you put the extra propellant capacity on the upper stage, and the upper stage just finishes the mission with extra propellant on board. You handle this the same way across all different rockets. They do it with Falcon 9 all the time. And you still land with minimal propellant every time, with just a small propellant margin to account for any off nominal performance and things like that. Getting some periodic venting from the middle of the vehicle now. On that left-hand side view, you're seeing an up-close view of Booster 7 on the orbital launch mount. Head-on, you can see the chopsticks are around the vehicle, but not actually attached. Just mostly there to stay out of the way more than anything else. That top tank is the liquid methane tank, and you can see that's about half full at this point. The liquid oxygen tank is about a quarter of the way full, maybe, and we're still working on keeping an eye on it to figure out if the propellant load is continuing. Ian, if you want to hit us with another A/B test to let us know if they're still loading.
Yes, they absolutely are still loading as
Still
of
are.
a minute ago. So
Sounds good.
slow and steady.
When we say slow, I mean, what, we've been live for a few minutes and they're like basically halfway done the methane tank? Like, hasn't been that
Yeah.
slow.
Yeah, slow as in there's probably like a fire hose of propellants going into that tank. It's
Yeah.
definitely not slow in terms of the flow rate, but in terms of the volume percentage of the tank,
There's
slow
just a
and
lot of
steady.
propellant to load. That's true.
Exactly.
All right, let's see what other questions we've got here. Also, some support. Zaphod became a red team member, so Zaphod, thank you for that support as well. And Rankley with a $5 tip saying less scaffolding and a very clean pad means getting closer to launch. Hashtag NSF math. Appreciate that. I agree. All right, let's bring in some more questions here. Bombardier, I know how to pronounce that right because I'm also an aviation nerd, says, will the tower itself need extensive shielding since SLS roasted the mobile launcher on liftoff? Will we see something like that when Starship launches? I do believe we're expecting them to shield the orbital launch mount at some point, likely somewhat similar to the tower they have at 39A, the crew access tower. I don't know if they'll do it initially. It's not like a requirement because you can. It's a pretty bare bones truss structure. There's not a whole lot of sensitive equipment. As long as your plumbing up and down the tower and your electrical connections are shielded themselves, the truss structure will be fine. But for longer term use, you can see near the bottom of the tower on that right hand view, they've got some cladding already up near the base of the tower, which probably gets hit the worst. Wouldn't be surprised if we see the rest of the tower get cladded over time, but not necessarily a requirement for that first flight, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah, it
doesn't
might not
seem.
be needed. Oh,
Sorry, go ahead,
go
Alex.
ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it doesn't seem like it's a requirement to have the whole tower cladded for the first flight. And plus, based on their whole launch mount readiness campaign over the past few weeks, the past few months, it seems like they're only doing the work that's necessary to not destroy their infrastructure. So it seems like cladding is kind of on the back burner right now. Maybe we'll see them come back to that between this first and second flights or sometime later this year or so. But it seems like they just have the necessary cladding right now to not have substantial damage to the tower.
There we go. Perfect. Our next question here from Isaac saying, is there a non-zero chance that the FAA could deny the license entirely? And if not, why aren't they just granting it already? So what are the teams actually working on in order to get the license granted to SpaceX for that launch? Like, what's the work that they're actually doing? Anybody?
Alex, you want to take that one? I could grab
Well,
it
I
for you
could
too.
take that one. Yeah. So usually, what they tend to do is, they have to look at the things like the closures of the corridors when they go into launch, the danger zones and things like that. Like, what is the impact of the flight that they're going to be doing around the area and things like that. The coordination between SpaceX and other entities and things like that. So they have to look at a lot of things. They also have to look at the parts of the environmental assessment that they have already concluded, because there are some that are only done after the launch. There are others that need to be done before the launch, and there are others that have to be done during the launch itself. And so they need to be sure that SpaceX will follow all of that stuff. You don't normally see these licenses being revoked. What you see is actually the FAA coming forward and try to help on those parts that are a little bit more icky, and that might take a long while to get
Icky.
through. Yeah, that they are not really that straightforward. Let's put it that way, right? It's a little bit
Okay.
more ugly to work with, and they try to come forward and try to go alongside with the company. We've seen these on previous on other companies as well, with the rockets and first flights, even flights of already flown rockets but from other locations, like Electron flying from Wallops. We've seen that already as well with the FTS system and all that. So it's a whole process here, and it doesn't take just 1 week or 1 month. It takes sometimes up to a year or more. So yeah.
All right, let me bring in some more questions there. Thank you for that, Alex. As propellant load is continuing again, if you are just joining us, this is a real propellant load test that is not just nitrogen or anything like that. They are loading methane into that top tank and liquid oxygen into that tank, the liquid oxygen tank, on the bottom of the booster. No idea what the other objectives of the test may be. It could simply be basically a wet dress rehearsal, but with the booster on its own. It could be worth mentioning. Let's see if that quick disconnect on the right-hand side of your screen there, that's the booster quick disconnect where the propellant flows into the vehicle from. And it's possible they could finish propellant load and then do a disconnect test with that umbilical. That will be something to keep an eye on, but we'll point out anything else we see as to what else they might be testing. We got a good question here from Caitlin in chat asking, can you explain what I meant by A/B testing? So all an A/B test is, if you on your stream, everyone watching can do this too. If you just click back like a minute earlier in the stream, and that's an easier way to see if the frost line is still growing. So if you click back a minute and the frost line is lower, there's still propellant loading. If you click back a minute but the frost line's in the same spot as it was a minute into the future, then they've actually stopped loading at that level and they're doing a partial fill or something like that. That's what we mean when it's A/B testing. It's like the A frame and the B frame. Tips and tricks on Texas tank watching.
And speaking of A/B testing, they're still going with repellent load. Just a quick reminder.
All right, thank you for that, Ian. We're our designated A/B tester for today's stream, apparently.
Let's go. All right.
Ross with a good question. Has there been any progress on plumbing the water deluge system into the orbital launch mount? Alex, any progress on that front?
Not yet. The only signs that we've seen of all the water deluge system are on the parts behind and like right next to the tower, but not around the orbital launch mount. Like, all of those have occurred where you will expect no flames to reach during a launch, and that is sort of to be expected, because with a launch very imminent, you don't think that they're going to be going into all the preparations for the water deluge, and because that could that could probably delay the launch by several weeks, and so my guess, and what I sort of tried to say for a few months already, is that what they're gonna do is work on the deluge system as much as they can on the back side of the tower, which is parts that are very much protected by the flames of the booster as it lifts off and everything. And once they go into the second launch campaign, in that time frame between the first and the second launch, that could be the moment where they go in, they dig around the OLM, they put all the pipes, they put the deluge system, and then we see the second launch using that deluge system. I think that's probably going to be the case. And if not the second, it might be the third. You know, might be depending when they are ready, because we've seen the pipes, the manifolds, and things like that, and not all of them seem to be ready yet. So, you know, they're doing work, but it doesn't seem like everything is ready yet. So maybe it might not even be the second, might be the third. We'll see.
Sounds good. Thank you for that, Alex. Before we continue with more questions, again, tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat. If you've got more questions, we're going to keep those coming. I do want to thank everyone who sent support and allows us to keep doing what we do. So Jim Cavett offering a super chat just to say, hey, y'all. So appreciate that, Jim. Jim also gifted a Red Team membership, so thank you for that support. Mike says, getting ready for the delays, and Mike picked up a bit of store merch. Let's see what Mike got. Ah, of course.
Oh
The Eat,
no.
Sleep, Scrub, Repeat shirt. Hey, Mike, I'm not going to fault you for being prepared, so I appreciate that. Shop.nasaspaceflight.com if you want to pick up your own merch from the NSF store. Steph B gifted 5 Red Team memberships. So, Steph, thank you so much. If you get one of those memberships, be sure to thank Steph, or you can thank Zephod, who also gifted 5 Red Team memberships. So, thank you, everyone, for that support as well. All right, bringing in another question here. Michael, has there been a notice for a static fire test? If not, could this just be a spin prime test? There has not been a notice, and therefore, yes, it could, in theory, be a spin prime test. It could also simply be a propeller load test, like a wet dress rehearsal of some kind. So, a couple other options, but we're not expecting engines to be ignited today. Another question here. Sai asking, will Starship fly over land on the first orbital flight test, such as over Asia? I don't know if we have the maps in front of us. We'll maybe work on getting that on so we can show that if we want to. But, Alex, you plotted those maps. You want to tell us a little bit about the flight path we're expecting on that flight based on the marine hazard zones that came out recently?
Yeah, so the launch obviously will happen here from the Starbase. It'll go east, and it'll basically thread between Florida and Cuba, then go into the Atlantic Ocean, to the west of, like, southwest of Africa, going a little bit on that bottom part of Africa, and then into the Indian Ocean. It'll go north at that time, and then head sort of where the Indonesian islands and all of that are located, then the Marshall Islands, and the splashdown of the Starship is expected. Well, the reentry is expected to occur with between the Marshall Islands and Hawaii, with a splashdown, hopefully, if it survives reentry, going on about 100 kilometers north of Kauai. So that's sort of,
Thank you there, Alex.
yeah.
So not flying over land. So the takeaways there, not a land over flight like early in the flight. It'll be once it's basically in effectively orbit. It's not technically in orbit. It's technically a suborbital trajectory, but in space.
Exactly.
All right, let's see. Next question here. This is relevant from Starship 4000. On the upcoming flight test, will the flight termination system be armed? Absolutely, right, Ian?
Yes, it absolutely should be. If there's an issue with flight termination, the vehicle's not leaving the ground. And we should see a little bit before flight, right before the final stacking, we'll see the flight termination system, I guess like the detonators really, be installed into Ship 24 and armed. And once they are armed and they have kind of quote unquote the pins pooled, then we know that they are going for flight. So yes, there will be a flight termination system on board, absolutely. And just in case the vehicle goes off course or something goes terribly wrong with it, especially on a test vehicle like this, you want to have your flight termination system on the vehicle and ready to go.
And that's a requirement for all orbital flights, you know.
Yes, even
the
Falcon
exception,
9.
Yeah, the exception being crew vehicles obviously do not have a flight termination system, but the booster launching a crew spacecraft hasn't. Like Falcon 9 still has a flight termination system when it's launching a Crew Dragon mission. Dragon itself doesn't have an FTS, but Starship will absolutely have its ability to terminate the flight if needed. All right, next question here. All right, back into the speculation column. Here we go. When do we think that Ship 24 will be stacked? It's waiting there at the launch site. Ian, I made Alex go first last time. So Ian, any speculation on that?
Yeah, I think first off, it depends on what other testing SpaceX wants to do. So if this is their kind of final booster test, this propellant load here, if they're fine with this being their last booster test, it might be in the coming days. If they choose to do possibly more static fires or another propellant loading test, say if something comes up here that they don't like or they want to retest something, that could delay it a few days. Overall, I would not be shocked if we see Ship 24 stacked this week. But of course, that does depend on a lot of factors. And as we've said multiple times, SpaceX unfortunately does not publicize their exact schedules on testing, on booster or ship stacking. So we're really just at the mercy of when did the chopsticks start moving.
All right, there we go. All right, we will see. Also, I do want to point out, right before that camera switched over, I think we might have caught a glimpse of the SpaceX drone inspecting the booster QD, which would be in line for propellant load testing. There you go, just on the right-hand side of your screen there. Thank you, Patrick, who I believe is controlling the camera views now. That's in line with them getting used to the propellant loading. Of course, they haven't done this a whole lot yet, so getting some extra eyes on the fueling connection and I should say the propellant loading connection, because oxygen is not a fuel. But seeing some venting from around the launch mount as well as all the pressures are maintained and things like that. Propellant loading continuing here on Booster 7. In the meantime, I will bring on more questions. Question from Burke saying, the ice that forms on the outside of is water ice, I believe. How thick does it become, and is that a structural concern at all, Alex? Any concerns about the ice that forms on side of not just Starship, but all the other rockets?
Well, from a weight perspective, it is not really that much. You see that thick ice, but it's not really a lot compared to the whole vehicle. How heavy it is, it's not really a huge percentage of mass, and there are some concerns with ice for certain vehicles. We saw, for example, for the shuttle, they had well, you can take that off on the bingo card. That they had concerns with ice because it could impact the TPS and things like that. I'm not sure how that's gonna be for Starship. It's definitely less subject to ice falling off because it is on top of the vehicle instead of on the side. But still, you can imagine that maybe on the top of the methane tank of the ship, there might be some that falls off and then goes to, I don't know, a flap or something on the aft section. But still, it's not a huge risk. Like it's less exposure that you see there. In terms of weight, yeah, it's not a big deal.
Thank you, Alex. Keeping a close eye on the QD, of course, we saw the drone inspecting it there, and there are a lot of vapors around the rocket, simply because the air around the rocket becomes very cold when it touches the very cold rocket. And that's why the ice forms and things like that. They are taking a very close look at that QD, and it's hard for me to tell. It's possible that there's some extra vapors coming from around there. Can't tell if that's just an artifact of the fueling sequence or if there could be some sort of leak or something. If it is a leak, it would either be methane or oxygen. I don't want to speculate too much, but they're taking a look at the QD. Is just what I want to point out there, I suppose.
And since I am the designated AB person in the stream, I went back about 15 minutes, and yes, there were similar vapors around the QD arm there. So if this is a leak, again, we're not sure if it is. It's been going for a while, and they're continuing propellant load while it happens. So if there is an issue with that, it doesn't seem to be extremely severe.
Alex, you saying you've seen some stuff similar to this before, anyway?
Yes, so that's actually one of the things that I was talking on the background. That I've seen that before on other testing that they've done with a booster, and also even with a ship as well. We've seen some of those vapors as they fill the booster or the ship, and if they were leaking, you wouldn't see them loading the booster. Like once,
Right.
like as Ian mentioned, this has already ongoing for a while. So if it were a leak, you wouldn't see them actively, loading and loading and loading this booster over the past few minutes. It is true though that they might be checking maybe with a drone, like leak rates or things like that. They probably have, because as we've already learned with SLS, anything, if there's any sort of gap, hydrogen is very easy to leak, but in theory anything can leak if you have a very reasonable gap in your seals and things like that. So this is still probably vapors coming off, and so that it's important to check. because methane is very flammable as well. So even low concentrations can be dangerous around the booster. So that might be one of the things I might be doing with a drone, checking on those things. But might be just checking because they want to check and everything is normal. Who knows?
It sounds good. It's definitely not stopping propellant load, so that's why I was like, it could be this, but it's definitely not something to be concerned about. They're just likely taking a look and making sure everything is good while the test proceeds. So the methane tank is almost full at this point. Liquid oxygen coming up on about the halfway mark, I suppose. So yeah, propellant loading is continuing. While we continue to take questions, and also want to thank everyone for their support and continue to just offer updates on today's testing, I do believe we're going to do a quick commentary swap here. To start us off our coverage, we had Ian Atkinson on comms. And Ian, thank you so much for your support today.
It was great to be here. Even though we're not done with the propellant loading yet, it's still very exciting to see more testing ahead of the orbital flight.
Appreciate your help, Ian, and we'll talk to you more later. In the meantime, believe we are bringing on a local to the Starbase facility. I believe we've got Nick and Sweetie on comms with us now. Nick, how are you doing today?
I am doing a fantabulous there, Thomas. I guess I'm a local now, technically.
You are a local.
You
are
I moved
by far
down
the most
here.
local of this commentary team, so
I still can't see it, so keeping me safely away from the booster. So it's cool though.
Commentary today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's bring in some more questions for you here. Here's a good question from Brett saying, could they just do a partial propellant load for a small mission, or do you need to fully fuel the rocket no matter how light the payload is? Alex, I believe we've talked about this question a bit before. I think we're expecting a full propellant load regardless of the right?
Yeah, and we've seen that also with Falcon 9. It's usually good to not mess with the amount of propellant that you have on the vehicle. Also because if you think about it, if you unload the vehicle and you fire all of the engines, you eventually have more thrust to weight ratio, more acceleration, hence more aerodynamic forces and everything. So it's all, a game of let's not play with the things that we haven't flown with. Let's fly with full propellant load. The thrust to weight ratio is going to be the same as all the previous flights because the payload, even as Starship can carry 150 tons to orbit, it's still a very low percentage of mass compared to the, I think it is 5,000 tons of weight that the whole thing has in mass, right? So it's a lot of mass that the whole vehicle has, and the payload is just a small percentage. So all in all, it's not a huge deal when you have a low payload or a big payload. At the end of the day, we're talking very, very small amounts. And yeah, better to just not change the procedures for propellant loading and things like that and just keep the same. Even when we saw, for example, the Falcon 9 with the infrared abort test of Crew Dragon, the second stage was not going to be used, but it was still loaded. It didn't have an engine, like a proper engine. It had some sort of mass simulator for that. It was not going to be used because it was not an orbital mission, but still, it was loaded just like every single other Falcon 9 mission. The first stage was also loaded. Everything was just done the same way as every other mission. So same thing here. Once they already have those steps down, the countdown, the loading and everything, why change? It just basically opens the door to more problems, right? It's like, don't change what you already tested and keep it like that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for sure. Thank you for that. I want to thank some people who are sending support our way. Lisa became a PadRat member, so Lisa, thank you so much for that support. Thomas with a question, are we expecting a static fire today? Any overpressure notices, Nick?
I just checked, and no, unfortunately, no overpressure notices today. But hopefully soon.
Yeah.
Hopefully soon.
Hopefully soon. That's true. But yeah, no static fire expected today due to a lack of an overpressure notice.
And also there is the dance floor still installed underneath, if I'm not mistaken. So they wouldn't want to do that.
I gotcha.
But I would say I wouldn't like a static fire test because that will mean they need a lot more time for the launch.
Sure. Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah. So there you go.
Let's see what else we got here. A question here. Are they going to catch the booster on the first flight? Alex, I know you were looking at the trajectories and everything. Any clues as to what the fate of the Booster 7 is going to be on its first flight?
They don't really tell much. Even with Falcon 9, for example, when they do RTLS, they still have downrange. What is the downrange hazard zones for when if the boost pack burn fails and things like that. So I don't think they tell much about that, but we don't expect that first flight to be coming back here to the chopsticks for a landing.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. Let's see here. Another question. Here we go. Another trajectory question. Daniel asking, how long between launch and Starship splashdown on the first flight?
About an hour and a
Ooh.
half.
Yeah. Full orbit takes about 90 minutes, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, and even though it'll be slightly less than a full orbit, should be around an hour and a half. You're going slightly slower, so the decreased distance it works out to about the same. I'm looking forward to an exact mission timeline from SpaceX once we get a little bit closer to the launch attempt, but it should be about 90 minutes. Yeah. All right, quick question while we're on this camera view. We had one from Ben saying, "What's the box with the two holes at the top that is on screen now?" That's the kind of center left of our screen right now on the bottom of the booster. Nick, what's up with that?
Yeah. Well, that is where SpaceX keeps all the hamsters that spin the wheels that make the Raptor engines go. Of course, I'm
It is
joking.
only partially incorrect, Nick, so very well
I
done.
know, right? As I was making the joke, I'm like, hey, this is actually kind of working out here. That is the HPU, or the hydraulic power unit, and it is I guess the power source for gimbaling the Raptors, and it's like a hydraulic system that basically spins an electric motor from the batteries and turns it into hydraulic power, which then the hydraulics then change the direction where those engines are pointing, these Center 13 engines. But Booster 7 is the last booster to have HPUs. As we have seen, they add weight, and they have caused issues in the past because we have seen them replace this one. Going forward, Booster 9 and above, I believe, does not have an HPU, and they just use direct electric drive Raptors that can skip the old HPU. So that is what that is. The two circles on top look like some kind of antenna, if I had to guess, but it could also be a dinner plate that someone left up there. I don't know.
For the grackles. Yeah, those are believed to be Starlink antennas.
Like Starlink antennas, but they don't look like the dish that you get when you order Starlink.
Exactly.
They're the SpaceX internal Starlink antennas, if you will, for communications on the way up. Basically, just taking advantage of an upward-facing surface, right?
Yep. I don't. So this is funny because for Booster 9, Booster 10, and onwards, they're gonna be removing the HPUs, as Nick said. So where they're gonna be putting this is on top of the chines. So you see those vertical, things there. Those are the chines, and they're gonna be put on top of the chines. So there you go.
Nice. Meanwhile, propellant load continuing to, or propellant load is continuing. You can see the methane tank near the top getting close to full there as they wrap that up. And look at oxygen getting up to, I don't know, about 2/3 full or so. I'm rounding, but proceeding well so far. It doesn't seem to have encountered any issues during today's test so far. We're seeing some periodic venting from the vehicle. That's normal, as they just maintain the pressures required in the tank and things like that. And a smooth test today would be a really good sign ahead of the launch campaign because, again, it's still a very new vehicle. They've only done so many propellant loading cycles, and every smooth count-out they can get through is more confidence and more practice for the teams to be ready for launch day. So, yeah, so that is the deal there.
And also, you gotta realize that the booster isn't really, unless something goes wrong, the booster isn't necessarily anticipated to leave. And so at this point, they might be taking a look at those seals and making sure that all of the connections are good to go to do a full fueled test. I don't know why I was stuttering on that.
Say that 3 times fast, Nick. It's difficult. We get it. All right, moving on to some more support that have come in here, and also some questions are in here. David with a question: what happens if they pop the quick disconnect and they can't get it back in? So obviously, the booster quick disconnect, that one is intended to back away right at liftoff. But in theory, especially if they do a test, if they disconnect it and they can't get it to reconnect properly, that's going to be a long process to get that vehicle. You can't really detank it in the normal way. So Alex, what's the procedure there to save the vehicle so the crew can return to the pad?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't think there's any public comment on what they will do in that case. We do think that at least for the liquid auction, they have like drain ports on the bottom of the vehicle, because we've seen those used for Booster 7's very famous explosion. That it was more like a high energy event because the vehicle is still intact, obviously. But we saw those drain ports being used. They are at the bottom of the booster, sort of like in between the engines, sort of like that. And yeah, they basically do what it is. It's just draining everything that there is on the liquid oxygen tank. I don't think they are connected to the methane tank, so it will be for the liquid oxygen. I don't know for the liquid methane what they will do, to be honest. Maybe open valves and let it boil off. That could be a thing.
Right, that'd be my guess, that it's simply, your basically only option is to let it boil off naturally instead of actually offloading it.
Mm-hmm.
But no signs that there's anything wrong with the QD, just for the record. This is a pure hypothetical, but David, hope that answers your question, so appreciate that. Jody gifted 5 Red Team memberships, so Jody, thank you so much for that support. Callum with some support as well. Where will Starship fly over? We touched on that earlier. It's going to fly east from Starbase out over the Gulf of Mexico, and it won't really fly over land a whole lot until it is basically in space already. It'll cross over Africa and a little bit of Southeast Asia before coming down near Hawaii. Rob Gray became a PadRat member, so Rob, thank you for that support as well. All right, I've seen a couple messages like this. Nick, you've seen the drone out in the field. Chad is saying that the drone looks like it's a drone, like there's like a T-Rex riding the drone. I don't know any insight into what Chad is seeing there. I wish the drone was still flying so we could point it out.
Yeah, I wish it was too, because I didn't notice that just here today. But I do know that they have a lot of different drones. They don't just have 1 or 2 drones. They have a whole fistful. And some of them are huge, some of them are teeny, some of them you can buy off the shelf, some of them you can not buy off the shelf, and some of them are gas powered. They have like a whole lawnmower engine, and they have like 8 rotors, and they can lift like 50 pounds or something crazy. So they got a lot of different drones up their sleeve, and I wouldn't be surprised if maybe one of them was a time traveling drone and found a T-Rex. So who knows?
I saw a couple chat messages saying that it looks like there's a dinosaur on the drone. I don't know what's up. If the drone comes back, we'll have to take a look at it, but not in frame right now. And then Dico with some Euro support. Thanks for the stream, guys. NSF is the best. Love from France. Appreciate that, Dico. Thanks for tuning in. Let's see. Sean with a question. Any word on if SpaceX will try to catch the booster or put it down in the water? I believe we're not leaning towards a catch attempt on the first flight, like Alex, but not 100% confirmed yet. Paging Alex on commentary.
Oh, oh. I thought you were just talking about me, like in general. Yeah, like I don't think we have confirmation, but I don't think it's gonna be caught for the first flight. Later flights, we'll see, but first one, likely not.
Gotcha. All right, let's see here. Anand saying, do you think that a full load 33 engine static fire is a prerequisite for the FAA license? Don't believe we've had any indications that they need another big engine test, right?
I would agree with that statement there, Thomas. We probably don't need another engine test, but depending on if they scrub before those hold down clamps get released, they might have a unexpected static fire like
that's
Terran
true,
did a
yeah.
couple weeks ago.
That is true. Every launch attempt is a static fire attempt until the clamps are actually released. That is a good point.
Exactly.
Well, let's see what else we got. David became a PADRAT member, so Dave, thank you for that support. And here's a good question from Yehuda asking, does the FAA base their approval on these kind of tests? I do believe a lot of the pre-launch testing feeds into buying down the final bits of risk before the FAA issues a launch license, correct?
Yeah, they kind of get some of the information from these tests to inform all of the paperwork needed for the license.
And that's why we've also noted in the past that it's very possible that the launch license will kind of come in at the last minute. Like you could see, all the airspace and marine restrictions go into place. SpaceX could even announce the launch date and have everything ready before the license actually gets formally approved, simply because there could be last minute checklist items up to like a couple of days before that they have to do before the license can technically be issued. And the license is like basically ready to go, but just comes in at the last minute. That's very possible. So don't be surprised if it comes in pretty last minute. All right,
And I think
see.
that'll be finally, whenever that launch license finally comes in, that'll be the moment that I'm like, I'm gonna get really excited when I see that launch license.
For sure.
I'll be like, finally, after months of waiting, finally, because that is the thing. You can't launch without one of those. So
Exactly. Let's
Now
see.
we're getting.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I was gonna say that we're getting on that methane tank almost to the top where the vents are located, and so we're getting to that point where we saw that big vent on the wet dress rehearsal, and so we'll see what happens here because it's interesting that we saw that big vent that it seemed to be that that they were basically throwing out some methane from there. Might have been a little of an oopsie there. Oh, we can see some of the vents in there from the vents, which is needed as they try to go above the vents with that
You're
liquid
looking on the
methane.
on the left-hand camera view on the right side of the top of the booster, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that one. That is one of the vents on the methane tank. And so as they approach the final, few bits of the tank being filled, they need to drain to vent out some of the top of the gas that is at the top of the tank. And usually when you fill a cryogenic tank, you don't fill it all the way to the top. You leave some bubble at the top that is called the ullage bubble, so that any sort of boil off and everything can be there instead of otherwise you will have a bomb in your hands there because there's no way for the boil off to go anywhere. So
Rodolph in chat, I see your message just now saying, could this be a full propellant load hold for 4 hours? And for our sakes, I hope not. There is expected to be about a 4-hour launch window based on the marine hazard zones that went out. I certainly hope that is not the test objective today, because we will be here a long time looking at nothing if that is the case.
You're not looking at nothing, Thomas. You're looking at a almost fully fueled booster. That's very exciting.
All right, Nick. Right now we're looking at an almost fully fueled booster that is being filled. A booster that has been full for 4 hours is much less interesting.
Ooh, what was
that's
that?
That's why we have 24/7 robot cameras.
Ooh,
so
what was that?
raining ice. It's normal.
Raining ice.
It's okay.
Right.
Well, I want to be standing underneath it. You guys know it's like 90 degrees here. I'm sorry, 78 degrees right now. Right?
Might
Too bad
be,
they closed the pad
loud.
or whatever.
Yeah, you know. You gotta sign a waiver or something. Just like, listen, I accept the risk. Let me see what other questions and stuff we've got here. We got a whole bunch of them still coming in. Let's see. Puppy, thank you so much for your support there. Odds that it's just a full prop load, just checking newly enclosed atmospheres. I'm not sure I'm understanding the question exactly. Is a pressure notice mandatory for a sprint prime? No, that is not correct. Sometimes we got them for sprint prime, sometimes we didn't. so it's not necessary. That part I can answer. I'm not sure about the enclosed part of your question. If you want to ask again as a normal chat message, I'll try and clarify. But it is, I think we are guessing that this is just a propellant load test, yes.
Agreed.
Let's see what else we got here. A question from Christopher says, here in Tampa, Florida, do you think we will be able to see the orbital flight test from shore? It's going to fly east from Texas over the Gulf of Mexico. It'll be south of Florida. It's possible. I need to go back and find the work that I know Marco and Jonathan McDowell were doing to figure out like how far downrange it'll be at different points. If it's getting close to Tampa by the time it reaches T plus 8 or 9 minutes, that'll be near the end of Starship's burn, likely. So possibly, but I'd have to look at a map. I don't know if anyone here has off the top of their head.
I do not know. No.
Yeah. Well,
I'm frantically scrolling back through a few different text threads looking for that tweet, but I don't know.
We'll have to look at the official ascent timeline when that comes out from SpaceX as well, because all we have right now is mostly speculation. But it's possible, but stay tuned, and we'll get some more info closer to launch too. Yehuda, thank you for some more Super Chat support there. I appreciated that. Let's see here. Here's a good question from Colton. So who's going to Hawaii to see re-entry and landing? Jack got his kayak ready, or what's going on there?
I will be solidly. I'm not leaving the zip code till this thing flies.
Right, yeah.
So unless we've invented a way to travel roughly 7,000 miles between South Texas and Hawaii in about 90 minutes without a point-to-point Starship, I'll probably.
I was going to say a point-to-point Starship sounds perfect, but I don't think you can just hitch a ride on Starship. They probably wouldn't like that.
Yeah, they wouldn't like that, huh?
Valiant effort, though. But yeah, I don't know if we're going to have anyone out there in Hawaii. I'm sure people who are in Hawaii could get a wonderful view of re-entry, assuming Starship does make it that far. But not sure we'll have a NSF team member out there. We'll have to wait and see. Obviously, SpaceX should have some coverage as well. So looking forward to what visuals we do get from that end of the mission. Here's a question from Senketh. Why hasn't SpaceX done a booster test flight? I'm assuming they mean like a booster flying on its own rather than the upcoming flight with a Starship on top. Nick, any thoughts on that decision?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Talking about any like a booster flying on its own, like a sort of hop test or something with the booster. Why didn't SpaceX go down that route?
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, so the booster is not aerodynamically made to really fly on its own. Anyone who's played Kerbal Space knows you need to make sure your center of thrust and your center of mass are aligned properly. And if you take like a, I don't know what, 100 and something ton Starship off the top of the booster, that's probably going to throw some of your calculations off. So, yeah, they're you know, they got enough thrust vectoring control, but I don't think they would.
Go. Yeah, thank you for that. There's a lot of venting going on now from the LOX tank.
Yeah. Likely to be the topping off of that liquid oxygen tank. Or maybe it's a depress. But I don't see any sort of similar venting on the methane tank.
Yeah, they're not depressing the methane tank, I don't think. I think I agree with you that that's the pressure reduction to finish off liquid oxygen load, because that tank's getting pretty close to full as well.
Yep.
That's same thing that we saw blowing around, Nick. Is it a particularly windy day out there today?
It's always windy in South Texas. That is one of the wonderful things about Boca Chica. No matter if it's 110 degrees and 300% humidity, there's always a little sea breeze that'll keep you nice and cool.
I don't know if that mathematically works out. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, believe you me, it feels like it does.
Oh, I know it'll feel like it though. Yeah, on this camera view, folks, we're getting some questions. That's just a bunch of ice getting blown off the rocket as, like Nick says, it's a windy day down there. But that's pretty normal for most cryogenic rockets, not a big deal or anything. It's not going to break anything.
I'm thinking SpaceX should send out the little robo dog to collect that ice and then make ice cream out of it.
I'd buy some.
Yeah, me too.
But getting close to maybe wrapping up propellant load here. Let me dive into some more questions and things here. George asking, how are they not shielding the cryo pipes? I'm assuming they're talking about the plumbing you can see a bit exposed on the launch mount. Won't they be in harm's way when the dinosaurs go bananas? Guess that's a raptor reference. As far as some of the equipment that remains unshielded on the launch mount, any thoughts as to whether that will need to get shielded or if it's all right for the first flight? What do we think?
Well, I'd hope that they shield as much equipment as they can, because I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to be a little flamey under there.
Definitely, they don't seem to be in a hurry to shield that bottom part. They remove all of the scaffolding on the bottom. We've also seen them removing part of the scaffolding on the top. They even been removing the handrails, so the OLM on the top. You see some of that handrail, but you see the exterior one, the inner one has been removed, or part of it has been removed. So they're already preparing the OLM for that launch. It doesn't seem like they're gonna be doing that work, or if they do it, they might be expecting that to be very, very quick, because it's incoming, that flight. So I'm not sure they're gonna be taking more time for any shielding.
Gotcha. Thank you, Alex. Really quick, Jim Cavett gifted a Red Team membership. So, Jim, thank you for that support. Also, Florida Rich with a gifted Red Team membership. So, thank you so much for the support. So, folks, if you're just joining us, I want to go off for a quick recap of what is going on so far. We are also taking questions, so tag us at NASASpaceflight if you have any questions. But today appears to be a propellant load test on Booster 7. We're not expecting a static fire test due to no overpressure notice alerted. But Booster 7 is all on its own on the launch mount. Ship 24 hanging out at the launch site, but has not been stacked yet. And as you can see, tanks are almost completely full. They appear to have filled the methane tank, and the liquid oxygen tank is getting very close to being filled as well. And they are loading with actual propellants. We saw the ground support equipment spool up for the real propellants rather than just doing a nitrogen proof or something like that. So both methane and oxygen loaded onto Booster 7 right now. The countdown appears to have gone relatively smoothly, no big holds or anything that we could tell. So appears to be a nominal test so far, and we're standing by to see if there will be any other objectives, especially keeping an eye on the booster QD, the quick disconnect that you see on the bottom right of your screen. That could be one test they could knock out at the end of a propellant load test if they wanted to, so we'll keep an eye on that. But otherwise, doesn't look like engine testing today, but it's a big step regardless toward orbital launch readiness coming up in the next couple weeks. On that front, we do have a question here from Mason, so we should talk about it. It might be a bit late, but has there been any word about a possible orbital flight date? The one clue we got just the other day, the marine hazard zones for the orbital flight were filed. So marine restrictions to keep boaters out of the areas that would put them in harm's way during the launch. There were zones both just east of Starbase, where the rocket will initially fly out over the Gulf of Mexico. There are also some zones just to the west and north of Hawaii, where Starship is expected to re-enter, assuming a nominal flight. The dates on those hazard zones started on April 6th, which is just 3 days from now, and that is not expected to be the launch date. That's a little too close, mostly because Ship 24 has not even been stacked on the vehicle yet. So we've got some more milestones left. In theory, the window, it goes to, was it the 6th to the 12th, Alex? Were those the dates on the hazard zones?
Yep.
So towards the end of that window is like the, in theory, feasible date. I was speculating on NSF Live yesterday that those dates could be the dates for a full mission rehearsal where they want to practice enforcing the hazard zones, even though they're not actually ready to launch yet. That could be one explanation, and then we'll see the hazard zones refiled for later dates. They could also just be very optimistic, and those dates will move in a little bit later. We're not expecting a launch until, it's later than the 6th. I don't think we're expecting a launch this week to be vague. We haven't heard an exact date, and SpaceX should confirm the actual launch target once they're ready to do so. So we're getting close, maybe in the next couple weeks, but we don't have an exact date to target just yet.
The exact date is soon, TM.
Soon at TM, yes, thank you, Nick. Always.
And not May, Max. a buddy who's trying to
Yeah.
convince me it's May, and I'm like, no, it's not May. Don't let it be May.
All right, let me bring in some more super chats here. Squizgar says, well, I mean, you can launch without a license. The launch just gets more expensive, and you might not get any approvals in the future. That's a very good point. Important caveat. You can technically do it, but you shouldn't do it. And SpaceX is not going to launch without their launch license. So appreciate the support there, though. Josh with a question. What kind of view should I expect from Corpus Christi? Nick, I know you're familiar with the southern Texas area. I wonder if Corpus will get a good view of the orbital launch.
That is a really good question, actually. I haven't done any thought into that, but if you give me just a few 2 seconds here, let me see how far north Corpus Christi is from Brownsville. I wouldn't be surprised if, similar how you can see launches from the Cape, like a little further north, Google Maps is telling me it's 2 hours and 30 minutes, but what's the mileage? Come on, Google. Well, if I want to drive there, it's 160 miles. So it's probably like 130 miles north of Brownsville as the crow flies. Would that be kind of like Jacksonville area?
Ooh.
Or
Look at that.
Mm-hmm.
Venting from the methane tank up top.
Launch tank is almost completely full too. We're waiting for them to top that off. But yeah, so I mean, that's in the realm of, Florida launches. You can sometimes see all the way to the southern tip of Florida and all the way north above Florida even. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all in the realm of possibilities, I'd say.
I'd say so as well.
Yeah, let me see what other messages we've got here. Got a question here from Hazelnut saying, what is that black line or cable going down the booster, but is on top of the white, not getting frosty itself? Also, on that left-hand side view, you see it just above the quick disconnect. You definitely see it on some of our other camera views, too. I don't... Does SpaceX call that a raceway, or is that only a term used by, like, everyone else? I don't... Alex, maybe you know. The lines going up the side of the booster, I know there's
You mean
a lot of it is there's data lines and things like that, right?
the black line might be referring to the pipes up the booster? So you can see there on the QD, on the quick disconnect,
Yeah.
there are 2 sets of pipes. The one closer to the camera, I believe that is for wiring and things like that, and the other set is for pipes for the pressurization system. And one pipe goes to the oxygen tank, and the other one goes to the methane tank all the way up top. And I think there's another set of pipes on the other side, so like 180 degrees. There's also 2 pipes, one for methane and one for oxygen. That might be visible from one of the other cameras as well. But yeah, I'm not sure what else they might be referring to. That might be the case, and if that was, well, you now know what it is.
Yeah, I believe you nailed it, though. Alex, thank you for that. Let's see. Jody gifted a Red Team membership, and also Tracy gifted a Red Team membership. So thank you, everyone, for that support. Much appreciated. Nate offering some advanced speculation question here, so I'm going to share this with the class. What do you guys think is the chance of Ship 24 breaking up on reentry? Thanks for the coverage. What's our confidence level in Starship succeeding at reentry on its first attempt? So assume nominal SECO comes in on a nominal trajectory. What are the odds that the heat shield is successful on this first reentry attempt?
Well, first off, I'd say it's not a given that it will get that far, obviously, as this is a test flight, and we are just testing things. So we'll see how far they get. I'd say pretty good. They've put a lot of thought into this. I think if it makes it to orbit, that's the hard part, and the stainless steel is pretty durable otherwise. So we'll see.
Alex, any thoughts to add?
I don't think it will survive re-entry. But we'll see.
Alex,
We'll see what happens.
Killjoy.
Hey, I said this is the first flight, okay? If it doesn't re-enter, that is okay. Like, even if it gets to the point of re-entry, that would be already a win. Even before that, just a staging, it's already okay.
We are talking about the company, though, that was able to pretty much nail the first suborbital hop, less a landing. So perhaps maybe they'll get all the way there, but not be able to stick their reentry. We'll see.
I mean, it's also the company that made the boom under Booster 7.
Hey, we don't talk about that. That was not a RUD. It was a rapid, unscheduled little white air conditioning vent RUD. What is
Yeah,
that? What is the little vent that I'm seeing there, Alex? That little vent that looks like a little choo-choo train whistle.
Yeah, that is part of the conditioning when they basically do all of the condition of the OLM as they release pressure and things like that. It's okay. It's not like the big OLM vent where it is chilling down the pipes for liquid oxygen load and things like that. These are more like maintenance of the pressure and things like that. It's less of an indicator of things, more like it just happens.
Gotcha. Bringing in some more questions here. My screen name says, "What are the NSF team members' thoughts on a floating target for Ship 24 to aim for landing?" Don't think it's even going to try to really land. I think the goal is to just survive reentry. And I don't think any of the drone ships volunteered to be a test subject on that front. So
Yeah.
I think there's not going to be a floating target or
Hey,
anything.
hey, SpaceX! If you want a floating target, I will build you a boat with a camera on it, and we will be your floating target.
Perfect. Here's a good question that I'll open to both of you because I don't know if any of us know the answer, but I certainly don't. Good Gremlin says, "Where is the Booster 7 instrument unit or the computers housed? Where's the avionics housed on the booster?"
I believe that's on the top of the booster next to the interstage, right?
Yeah, most likely, or maybe between engine section and top of the booster. Maybe yeah.
It is kind of great though, because we do live in the modern era. This isn't the Apollo era where they have that whole computer ring in the Saturn V on the third stage. They could run this thing on a fairly small computer. I'm sure it's not the size of your laptop or even your big gaming PCs, but it's probably also not the size of the Apollo computers, which probably means they can slip it in little crevices here and there and not have to have a huge appliance for that. But I don't know the actual answer to that. I do not know.
Wouldn't be surprised if there's engine computers specifically that are got to be down in the engine bay and things like that, but the sort of master booster avionics could be near the top of the booster, like you said. Could be a few different computer units at different locations on the vehicle.
Because I know, at least for Falcon 9, they have some computers on the octaweb. They have another few computers on the interstage and things like that. It's a little bit of a share between different parts of the booster. Definitely not on the outside. Or on the tanks. You won't see a computer inside of the tank.
Let's see, another question here. James asking, what is the weight difference between an empty Falcon 9 and an empty Starship booster? Do we have dry mass figures for those things?
The booster of a Falcon 9 booster empty, I think it is somewhere between 25 to 30 tons. Maybe more like 20 to 25 now that I think about it. And this booster 7, or Super Heavy in general, it's more like 250, so like 10 times as heavy without fuel.
Even
this is like empty, yeah.
Jeez.
Like 200 to 250, yeah. It's funny how the Gridfin shadow is casted over the ice up top.
I was just looking at that, Alex, and I was thinking, I really wish I was there so I could take a pretty picture of it, but
You win some, you lose some. I mean, the shadow will still be there this time of day with the Starship on top. Later there'll be future opportunities. That is cool, though.
But I want the Frosties.
This is Frosty, so it's cool. I'm so sorry. Lucy with a question. Will this be the first orbital launch from Texas? I think so, unless I'm crazy.
I believe it will be the first orbital launch of a liquid fueled rocket, but I think that there have been like somewhere around 50 liquid fueled rocket launches from Texas in history. I know my buddy Austin DeSisto, who works with our friends over at Everyday Astronaut. He was compiling a list. We were talking the other day, trying to figure out. I was like, I can't think of any other ones besides like the Blue Origin stuff and
Right, yeah.
Starhopper and possibly Starship, and when we were looking back in history to like the 60s and 70s, back with some of the Apollo stuff, and there weren't anything in Texas. So this might be the first orbital flight from Texas, but it is definitely not going to be the first liquid fueled rocket from Texas. And y'all will
Right,
have to look
gotcha.
at his article to see the exact count.
Gotcha. But yeah, first orbital, I think I agree with you there, which will be, I haven't thought about that before, to be honest, but there we go. And the first of many, we hope. Even though the first flight is orbital with an asterisk, whatever you want to call it. We should talk about that actually, because we have a question here from Thomas saying, why isn't SpaceX aiming for a full orbit, or did I misunderstand something? I I think we've all assumed at least that it's mostly just about removing the risk of a failed deorbit burn, because something as big as Starship re-entering uncontrolled is not is a very high risk. So on the first flight, they're aiming for just short of orbit, so they know where it'll re-enter. Am I correct on that?
I do not know.
Looks. I mean, any other reasons they would go for slightly less than full orbit other than just avoiding the deorbit burn?
Mm, I mean, I'm not fully sure because I've always been of basically of the thought that yes, it could fail the orbit burn, but it has 6 engines, so it's always been to me more like if it fails catastrophically at the end of the burn or during orbit or whatever, you still have like that, like probably a lot of other things in your plate there, because if you cannot relight any of the 6 engines on the ship to do a deorbit burn, that is probably a big problem that you're having with your vehicle. So I don't know why they're not doing it like a proper orbit, but maybe that is just simple. It's whatever is simplest to do.
We'll have to, hopefully SpaceX will provide a bit more info too. A lot of this is like, we've been speculating for like years at this point on certain things that they'll test early on in the process. And so we're just waiting for the final, crossing of the T's, dotting of the I's to, know exactly what the plan is on Flight 1. Clarence, thanks for becoming a PadRep member. Greatly appreciate that support there.
And
Mohammed with a question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
the booster is detanking, right? We have mentioned that, right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we'll reiterate that the liquid oxygen tank, the frost is definitely receding. So it did appear that they reached the full propellant level on both tanks. And so
Yep.
I do believe we are getting into detanking there. Did we see that booster quit disconnect do anything?
I
haven't
don't
seen
believe I did.
anything.
So I think there was just a good old-fashioned prop load test.
Mm-hmm.
And it appeared to go smoothly, right? I didn't see any sort of hiccups or holds or anything, right?
I didn't either. It seemed to go quite well on what we could see, and I think what we're really looking at here is like basically the booster getting its version of the full wet dress rehearsal, which we will
Yeah,
hopefully
sure.
see again once we have a full stack. And I am so excited for that next full stack, and when they fully fuel it. I'm actually wearing my full stack T-shirt right now.
Are you now, Nick? I wonder where could people go if they wanted to get their own full stack T-shirt?
I think there's a website. Let me pull it up. It's shop dot I don't know, NASASpaceflight.com maybe. I don't know.
I think that I think you've got it right there,
Whoa, that's
folks.
exactly the shirt I was wearing. Look at that.
It's amazing how that works. Yeah, folks.
Wow.
Thank you for everyone who sends support during these coverage of the streams and things like that. If you want a full stack shirt, because that is the big milestone coming up down there in Starbase, shop.nasaspaceflight.com is the place to go. Lots of merch regarding the Starship program and lots of other spaceflight programs as well. To show your support for NSF, all of the proceeds goes towards improving our coverage and allowing us to do what we do. Also, if you do a shop order a bit of merch of any kind, you can leave a message for us there. You can say, "Hi, Thomas," except spell it wrong because you're Patrick. And you can leave a message for us, which will show up on stream, and we'll shout you out on the live coverage. So if that's a thing you want to do, you can go for it. But we do appreciate everyone who supports us that way, as well as super chats and tips and things like that. It's a great way to help us do what we do. So there's your merch plug. Appreciate everyone's support as always. Oh my goodness. All right, I'm going to back into this question that I started. Muhammad, I see your question. Why the chopsticks are holding onto the booster and not in the launch configuration that has been used in the wet dress rehearsal and the static fire? Oh, I know we know we're
Mhm.
not doing any sort of engine testing or anything today, so I don't think they need to move the sticks away from the vehicle like they have in previous tests and things like that. So just kind of they're not attached to the booster; they're just nearby.
Mhm.
Could just be a little bit extra protection to prevent the booster from like tipping over somehow. I don't know. It could also just be they're out of the way up there, so that it's good enough, you know.
Hmm.
Let's bring in some more questions here. Let's see what else we got. 250 says, last time your camera avoided flying stones. Well, this time will it avoid the scaffolding? I think they're going to like remove most of the scaffolding before they fly, at least hopefully. They've started to, I know. But Godspeed to our cameras wherever they end up being for launch. And let's see what else we got here. Happy with a question. Thank you for the $20 super chat. You mentioned the flight path of the ship. How far downrange will the booster go before it turns around to come back? So to reiterate, we don't know if the booster will even do that on flight one. Obviously, eventually it will.
Mm-hmm.
But on flight one, we're not super sure what exactly the booster is actually going to end up doing. Do we have an idea, like during a nominal flight, how far downrange Miko and stage step will be for the boost back burn to start?
Alex?
Well, how far away? I don't think we actually know. But it won't be that far away. It's probably gonna be maybe 100 kilometers out in the ocean. May not be that much. Obviously, as it tries to do the boost back burn, it'll go a little bit further away, because it's boosting back, but it still has like the return is not instant. It takes a little while to return all the way back. That velocity keeps going down and down and down until it reverts all the way to the west and back to the launch site. So in that process, it might go maybe 120, 130, maybe 150 kilometers downrange, more or less. That's sort of what Falcon 9 does anyways. So sort of off the top of my head, what Falcon 9 does might be similar distances for Super Heavy.
Yeah. Well, we'll definitely learn more when the flight actually happens. Ahead of the flight, we'll get some more information about the ascent timeline, the mission timeline, and things like that. We'll get insight once we see it fly for the first time, and obviously SpaceX is going to make changes after flight one, so things will change. But either way, there are different ways to learn more about how this whole program is going to work out, and I can't wait to get some answers to those questions. Let me see what else we got here. Helder with a question. Why is it that the quick disconnect disconnects so close to liftoff instead of such as 15 seconds before or something like that? The main reason, Nick, you want to take that one?
Yeah, there's a couple reasons. First of all, you want to make sure that you have the option to easily detank your vehicle up until pretty much the last minute. If you for some reason if you decide not to launch, it's much easier to detank it via the plumbing that you just pulled, put all the propellant in with. Also, just looks cool. Like you can't deny watching like a huge piece of steel slam shut as huge rocket engines go right by is really awesome, and they have to have a camera inside of there. And I'm sure they're in a competition with the space shuttle and the Saturn V people for the coolest booster hood closure footage. So I look forward to that compilation video.
There we go, yeah. Seeing some questions, by the way, or not some questions, some chat messages. We were talking about this will be the first orbital launch from Texas, and even if it takes technically the second flight to actually be an orbital flight, Starship will be the first orbital system to hopefully reach a success from Texas. People point out that the Conestoga, which is largely considered to be one of the first commercial launch efforts, that launch program did occur from Texas, and in fact, I believe both the first and second flight of the Conestoga program did occur from Texas, but they were the first one failed; it blew up on the pad, and the second one was a suborbital mission that was successful but suborbital.
Mm.
The third and final flight of the program, which was supposed to be orbital, was from Wallops, and that failed anyway. So it is true that there have been other attempts to get orbital programs from Texas, but none of them have reached success. Good point. Good shout out to the Conestoga program. There's a very niche part of space history there for those who may not be familiar. Here's a good question from Demosian. Is that like someone from the moon Demos? I'm going to assume that's what that name means. Even if they couldn't deorbit it, why would that matter? They could just fire the flight termination system and it will re-enter in little bits and not whole. But the problem with that is you then create a cloud of debris in orbit, which is a very, very bad thing. All of that debris would still be on an orbital, trajectory for weeks at least. And if something blows up in Leo, the explosion can actually kick some debris up to even higher orbits where it stays around longer. We've seen this a lot with recent anti-satellite weapon tests and things like that. And so actually you'll hear on Falcon 9 missions, for example, right before the upper stage actually reaches orbital velocity, you'll hear that stage 2 FTS has saved, which means that beyond that point, if a failure happens, they will not activate the flight termination system because it actually creates more problems than it solves. And the same would be true on Starship. So you don't use an FTS once a vehicle is actually orbital. Good question, though. All right, I'm going to look through again. Tag us at NASASpaceflight in chat. We're standing by. The methane tank still remains almost entirely full. The liquid oxygen tank, the frost has started to recede. It's not entirely. It's definitely, we're into detanking by now at this point, but it's they're holding the methane tank a little bit longer, I think. Either way, I'm going to keep some questions coming. Jay Merce says, "Keep it up, watching from Kentucky daily. Love the coverage you all support. Would love to be near for the launch." Jay Merce, thank you so much for the support and the kind words. Glad you're enjoying the coverage. Bean with a question: Does Falcon 9 have remotely reattachable quick disconnects like Starship does? Alex, you're the Falcon 9 expert around here. Do you know?
Now I have to think about that. I don't think it has. Especially for the second stage, it's like a traditional QD system, with like a pulley that pulls on the QD, and like actual people have to go and reconnect that. So I don't think about the booster, because those are closer. Those might be maybe any chance of reconnection, but they also have like a cover on the QD system on the booster side, so it's not the same way as it is here, for example. So it's sort of that cover that you see there on the QD system on Super Heavy. It is here on the OLM for SpaceX for the Falcon 9. It is on the booster, so it gets like two covers, one on the ground side and one on the vehicle side. So I don't think that is actually something that they can open then and like remotely and connect. I think it's everything manual. Yeah.
Gotcha.
There are other QDs as well on the vehicle, like for the entry stage, the fairing and everything, and all of those. Those seem very much manual connections.
Okay. I got a message here from Robert saying, "Going to think of you good guys every time I wear this hoodie." Thank you, Robert, for the support. They picked up the Raptor 33 engine static fire hoodie from shop.nasaspaceflight.com. A great choice there. So, Robert, thank you so much. I bet that item is, in some regard, a bit of a limited edition item because soon enough, the 33 engine static fire isn't going to be like the most recent big milestone. We're going to get to flight before too long, and we're going to have to get some new merch to commemorate that. So, if you want to pick up your big engine static fire merch, go ahead and check out the shop for sure. Carl,
know,
thank you for gifting a Red Team membership as well. Much appreciate all the support, everybody.
I was gonna say you know who needs new merch?
Ooh.
Apart from me, Nick, because I'm looking
Oh.
here at the new video that
Oh,
we've released.
a clever plug.
Wow.
And he's wearing an old hoodie here on the thumbnail. And yeah, now you can watch that new video, Starbase update. You know, we're releasing these weekly, sort of to explain people what's going on every week at a Starbase, and hope you like it. So do definitely check that out. Maybe mods can put that on chat or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you
Mods,
can
if you
see
can
it.
get the link to the brand new video in chat, that would be great. But yeah, we've got a new video up now for everyone craving more Starship coverage, and for the next one, we'll make sure Nick gets the updated logo on his merch. But it's retro merch now. Honestly, I respect it.
Exactly. That's what I was thinking as I was putting it on. I was like, huh. Well, I don't have anything else. I don't have
No,
the
it's
new logo,
perfect.
so
I
here we
do believe that
go.
video is
Call it
pinned in
retro.
chat now, by the way. So if you're looking for the video, I believe it is pinned in chat now. Thank you, Mods, and folks for getting that done. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? Here's a good question from Kevin. Any word on if SpaceX is going to cover the ship quick disconnect arm or is swinging it out of the way the only protection it's going to need? So if you look on this view, there's the chopstick arms that are kind of around the booster. Right above that, left of the booster, is the ship QD arm. That's how they prop load the booster. There, on this view, you can see it to the left-hand side of your screen. Obviously, it's not connected to anything because there's no ship. Um, any word on if there's going to be additional shielding or anything on that arm, Alex or Nick?
haven't
I
seen
think it's
anything.
I I've seen it swing pretty fast in person. Obviously not as fast as the QD hood, but
Yeah.
it can move. Like the first time I saw it, like I wasn't recording, unfortunately. I don't think I've actually gotten a clip of it. I think our robots did, but I remember like watching it and I was like, whoa, 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 that's fast. For something so massive and so high up there. So I think it is going to swing out of the way whenever they're done using it, and we don't know exactly how the countdown is going to look, and we'll get more data on that once it happens. But yeah, I imagine swinging out of the way because I don't see a big bulky hood or anything on top of the sensitive plumbing there. So I bet you they're just going to swing it out of the way.
Yeah, gotcha. Let's see what other questions we may have here. Let me see here. What in the... I'm going to ask this question just because reading it gives me quite the image. Could a Starship reattach to the booster and re-enter with the booster and get caught by the chopsticks?
Whoa. Whoa. Let's just say I don't want to be riding that Starship.
That
Yet. Wow.
I do not believe that is in the cards. I do believe this. Didn't Scott Manley do a suborbital docking video in Kerbal once? That's basically what this is.
You know,
Don't think that's going to happen.
it might be useful if you're coming back from Mars on an empty starship and you don't have enough propellant to slow down appropriately.
So what you dock to a booster on the way in, and then the
Mhm.
booster lands for you.
Exactly, and
That would be
then well,
insane.
but to get the booster in orbit, you'd have to do the super boost or duper heavy, which is duct taping 3 boosters together and
That
flying
takes
that
just
up there with a
depending on
tanker. Yeah, it sounds like a bit of a mess, but that would be kind of cool to watch for sure.
Oh my goodness. But on a more serious note, there are, at least in some regard, plans to have ships be caught in the future, at least the ones that are coming back to Earth. Obviously, ships going to the moon or Mars will need landing legs, because there's no catch towers or anything. But especially like the tanker versions and things like that, to save a little bit of mass, those could use the tower arms to land on rather than
Mm-hmm.
having landing legs. So we will see ships likely get caught on their own in the future of the program. So
That will be cool.
are we starting to see a little bit of frost recede from the methane tank, I think, finally?
Kind of looks like that.
Just like a little bit, right? I think we're getting into proper detanking of both tanks at this point.
Yeah.
Also, would like to point out that we haven't seen almost anything from like the engine section, so they definitely, I don't think they even went to engine chill or anything. Which makes sense if it's just a prop load test, not doing anything with the engines. But I see the booster quick disconnect remains firmly attached, and I think we're firmly into detanking to wrap up today's prop load testing. So
I think the way that we're probably gonna get some sort of what's the word? And basically, whenever they do the booster quick disconnect, if they do a booster quick disconnect test, we wouldn't see them draining or loading propellants, because then it means something is going through, and you wouldn't see that. You will see them closing out, basically stopping the drainage or the filling of either propellants, or both in this case. And in some of the things that we will see, for example, is the OLM vent coming back and things like that, purging the lines on the ground systems and everything, while the keep everything on board the vehicle the same. So if we're seeing that drainage ongoing, we're probably not going to see that quick disconnect retract at the same time, because it will mean that things are going from the booster through the quick disconnect. You will probably want that quick disconnect to just have nothing at all.
gotcha. Right. Now let's see. Next question here from Daniel says, will Booster 7 be the last booster to have hydraulic gimbal for the Raptors? I believe we touched on this earlier. I believe yes, right?
Yes, unless in some point in the very far future they decide to add it back. Booster 7 will be the last with the hydraulic power unit and a hydraulic drive system for the gimbling of the 13 Centaur Raptor engines. I believe Booster 9 and forward are using electronic thrust vectoring control, using just direct drive motors.
Here we go. Let's see. Question from Coxnot saying, what material are the grid fins made from?
It's not. Is it steel?
They look like steel.
I thought
Well,
they
definitely look
mold
heavy.
steel.
It's
Yeah.
not aluminum or titanium. They look pretty heavy.
If I remember correctly, they are steel, just like almost everything else on Starship. They're much bigger. Obviously, the overall shape is similar to those found on Falcon 9 and Falcon Heavy, but they are much larger because, well, it's a much bigger vehicle. You need a lot more control authority.
Yeah.
But the aerodynamic shape is about the same. But yeah, I think they're steel.
And they're not, because we see them and they are black. I believe they are coated with some kind of similar paint as we see there. For example, on the quick disconnect and things like that, they have like a coating there for the metal, so that it doesn't really rust. Because Booster 4 initially had, like when they were installing the grid fins, they were installed and they were rusty, and then they painted on the grid fins. So and they started looking black. So at least with these, we wouldn't see, with that coating, we wouldn't see them rusted.
Gotcha. Demosian with another message following up on the previous discussion regarding could you use the FTS to deal with a uncontrolled reentry, clarifying they meant firing the FTS during the eventual uncontrolled reentry. So basically, once it naturally comes down, and so it's not orbital anymore, firing the FTS so it's not one big chunk. And now I understand what you're saying. However, because it's an uncontrolled reentry, you don't actually know where it'll end up coming down. And so you might not necessarily have a ground connection to the vehicle. Like you won't be able to prove that you'll have the ability to command the FTS destruction during reentry because you don't know when or where it'll actually happen. Also, the batteries on board Starship could die and likely would die by that point too, so you wouldn't have onboard electrical connection to actually command the FTS. So now I get what you're saying now. So it wouldn't be an orbital debris cloud, but because it's uncontrolled and you don't know when, that's still not an option. So they will. Their risk reduction strategy is avoiding the deorbit burn altogether. But there you go. Very good question. I get what you're saying there.
And also if the reentry is uncontrolled, it will probably break up. So you already have the ship becoming pieces. You don't need the FTS, right? So that's
Well, yeah, I think the
another
point being,
point.
though, if you blow the FTS, you're going to have much more smaller pieces versus any big chunks surviving.
I mean, you'd hope that we don't have to worry about this and the heat shield survives. But in the event that you can't talk to it, you wouldn't want to be relying on FTS to destroy it. You want it as passive of a deorbit as possible, which equals not having a full orbital insertion burn. Which I guess begs the question: is this actually an orbital test flight? I mean, it's an orbital velocity test flight, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But
We're seeing that hydraulic power unit now venting. That is normal. We've seen that in previous tests as well. It's not that they have tested that a lot. Like it's not being, 10 or 12 times, but it's being a few times already. So it's normal, and likely it's just an indication that probably that HPU is working, and maybe behind all of that, covered within all of that OLM shielding and everything inside, maybe the engines are moving, doing something. We'll see. Maybe SpaceX says something about that.
We shall see. I'm going to keep some more messages coming. We're still getting questions and things like that. Andrew became a Capcom member, so Andrew, thank you for your support there. We really appreciate it. Jim Cavett gifted another Red Team membership. Jim, you've offered a lot of support today, so thank you so much. Sun Express showing some support as well, so appreciate that. Listen, we got Paul took a trip to the store. Let's see what Paul picked up. Says Raptors go burr soon, TM. Picked up the Raptor 33 engine static fire t-shirt. A great choice there, Paul. And also picked up a, drumroll please, the throw blanket. Nice choice there. Paul, thank you for the support there.
I didn't know we sold blankets.
We do. We
Oh,
have a 33 engine static fire throw blanket.
I'm gonna need to go get a throw blanket, I think.
It'll be something with the new logo on it.
Yeah. So next Starbase update, I can just wear the blanket.
Wear the blanket. Perfect. Fantastic. Let's see. I've got a question here from Carson Reed saying, are we going to expect the booster to do a boost bag for every launch, or is it going to be more like Falcon 9 drone ship landings? Do not believe there's any plans for ocean recovery for the Super Heavy booster. It is baseline to RTLS recovery and get caught by the tower on all missions. Is that correct?
I believe so. Operationally, yes, I believe so. I think once they nail down the recovery method for the booster, I wouldn't be surprised if we see the was it fully expendable mode or whatever on Super Heavy, like they do with Falcon Heavy or whatever. When they expend the side cores and the center core, they can get a lot more mass to orbit. I wouldn't be surprised if they eventually, if they have old boosters sitting around, they want to just send off in the Viking funeral, they can get a little bit more mass out of them.
Here we go. And here's a good question from Senka saying, will the detanked propellants be discarded or stored back in the ground support equipment? I believe they are able to reclaim most of the methane and oxygen that you would have used today, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and also they lose some of it due to boil off, but the majority is drained back through the same pipes that they use to load the propellants.
There we go. Let's
something
see.
that I didn't see
Oh, go ahead.
today. Yeah, I was thinking something that I didn't see today was sort of like the engine chilling that we tend to see. I'm kind of looking back here to those. There's like a pool where they vent all of the leftover chill down and everything for the engine, and I haven't seen anything on our cameras. So it's definitely sort of just like a tanking test, but they haven't exercised all of that chilling of the engines. It looks like.
All right. Bringing in another question here. Elmat says, "Flight day, wear your merch and bacon tacos all around." Let's see. Could the ship descend, hover close to the water, and quick flip to land horizontally on the water? Might be a whale who didn't get warning. I don't know if they have any plans to actually attempt an actual landing of any kind with the ship. We know there's not, there's not going to be a drone ship or something out there for it to land on. I don't think they're planning to attempt like a landing burn just to even simulate that or anything. I think they're just hoping to survive reentry on the first flight. Again, more info from SpaceX forthcoming, hopefully. But we haven't heard anything regarding an actual attempted like soft landing. We don't really know for booster or ship if they'll try that on flight 1 or if that's a later flight objective. But we'll have to wait and see. Thank you for the support and the question. Rebecca asking, how tall is Booster 7? Alex, you got the height of the booster on hand by any chance?
Yeah, it's a very nice number, 69 meters.
Oh, that's right. How do I forget?
Yep.
There we go. Let's see here. Question here. Does RTLS mean that the booster would go more or less with minimum pitch and Starship would give most of the horizontal velocity to orbit? Not really. Sometimes the booster, takes a slightly more lofted trajectory, a more straight up trajectory than other flights for Falcon 9, for example, in order to facilitate the return to launch site profile. But for the most part, the booster still pitches a fair amount of downrange. That's why you have to do a boost back burn, so the booster to kill its horizontal velocity and come on the way back. Because again, the primary objective is to get the payload and the upper stage carrying it to orbit. And so the booster will still pitch downrange a fair amount before coming back. If you went pretty much straight up, then it would be much harder for Starship to get to orbit because, like you said, Starship would need to get all of that horizontal velocity. So it's not really like going straight up. It sometimes flies slightly more lofted than another rocket would, but it's not a huge difference. The Space Podcast says, why does Starship not have stringers? Well, I don't know. They do have stringers. In fact, you can see lots of them on this view right now. They've got some stringers on the top where basically the inner stage section is, where the grid fins are. That's on top of the methane tank. Though you see some stringers on the outside there. You see some stringers on the intertank section, which isn't really an intertank technically. It's a common dome structure on super heavy boosters, but around that area there's some stringers. And then near the bottom of the vehicle where the engine section is, there are also some stringers. For those who are not familiar, stringer is basically just an outside brace that makes that part of the vehicle slightly stronger. And on rockets, it's very common to do that around near the tops and bottoms and middles of tanks, where there's slightly less structural rigidity due to pressurization and things like that. So pretty common, and super heavy has lots of them. I think there's some on Starship as well, right?
Yes, inside of the tanks, at least for Ship 26 onwards, on the liquid oxygen tank, I believe they are adding reinforcements there. They also have a lot of reinforcements on the skirt, but inside, because on the outside you get all the TPS and everything. Still, we're seeing on some of the new vehicles as well the payload bay section with a lot of reinforcements on the outside as well, especially on the leeward side where there's a door and everything, because they have had problems with all of the structures and everything. And so it gets stringers, but obviously in parts where they don't have to put all the TPS tiles and things like that, because otherwise it would be very uneven.
Actually, so the ship itself does also have stringers, though, not just the booster.
Just possibly not quite as visible.
But yeah, exactly. All right, another question here from Daniel. Could SpaceX possibly use Starlink to cover areas where TDRS is not available? I believe Starship has sorry, too many words that start with star. Starship has Starlink antennas, don't they?
They sure do. And in fact, we have speculated that we can see two of them right there. Those two black dinner plate looking things on top of the hydraulic power unit on the box of the bottom of the booster definitely look like some kind of antenna. And we definitely know that the SpaceX is planning on using some of the Starlink satellites as part of the filings that they've made.
Gotcha. Here we go. Another question here from Muddy Creek says, while back there were photos of buoys with electronic packages at Starbase. Do you think these will be used for telemetry in the booster landing zone?
Oh, can I take this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
I knew you were going to speak up because I think you found some documentation relating to this, right?
yeah, more like it found me because when I tweeted the whole thing with the navigational warnings and everything, people were like, "Where can I find this?" And I explained that these navigational warnings come from, I think it is the some agency of the U.S. I don't remember now the name. And this agency, you can subscribe and they send you these notices via email. It's not like a place where you go and they have all of the notices there. They email you those notices. You can actually go once they are published by the next day, or if it's a weekend like this time, you can go and like by Monday you will see the notices. The point here is that someone told me, "Hey, I cannot see it in this location," and they were pointing out notices to mariners. And there's a these were like local notices nearby a Starbase and everything like that, and in the Gulf of Mexico. And so I tried to look for a Space Exploration Technologies because that's the name of the company. And there was only one notice, and it was actually for those buoys that they found. The locations, though, they do not seem to apply to the location of the splashdown of the booster, and more like the general area around the launch pad. It's more like maybe delimiting the blast danger zone for navigational for ships and boats and things like that. It seems like the coordinates that it has, it's sort of like that, like around the channel, a few kilometers, like 2 kilometers downrange, and a little bit south as well. So it doesn't seem like it is a full, right where the landing of the booster is supposed to happen. It's more like around the launch pad, but on the water side.
All right, gotcha. I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of views we'll get on the way back down as well. Not just during reentry and the descent, but the actual splashdown and things like that. Not just from the vehicle itself either. I mean, if you are in Hawaii, you will likely get a decent view. So, well, looking forward to seeing how it all works out. Let me see, what other questions do we have here? Yeah, so a quick recap. People asking, is this expected to be a static fire or what the heck? This just look just like a propellant loading test. You can see they're getting into detanking now. The engines never went into engine chill or anything, so just a propellant loading test, sort of a wet dress rehearsal if you think about it. To work on the ground support equipment and the booster itself and the connections between the two. And everything appears to have gone smoothly, right?
Mm-hmm. Looks like it. We'll see if SpaceX announces anything official as like, hey, we completed the successful test or whatever. But it looks like the rocket is still on the pad. That is not a bad thing if you're testing stuff.
Right, exactly. I've got a message here from Willie. Says, the Jack have a good picture of rock for a big stretched metal print. I would get a print like that immediately, referring to the Stratolaunch carrier aircraft. I don't believe we've got that metal print on the store right now, but I will certainly pass that along to the store team as a request. I'll get back to you on that. In the meantime, thank you for picking up your Artemis 1 for Fun shirt, one of my personal favorites of the very scientific names for all the components of the Space Launch System. Highly recommend. Also picked up a Texas Tank Watchers hat, another great choice. So thank you for the support there, Willie, and we'll reach out about the metal print options there. That is another, of course, that is a great way to send support to NSF, and we appreciate everyone who does that. There is another way that you can support us outside of YouTube as well. If you just want to head over to the NASA Spaceflight tip jar, it's tips.nasaspaceflight.com. That is a great way to send support directly to us. You can send a message, so if you do so during one of our live streams, you can just like you can through the YouTube Super Chat program, you can send us a message and just offer your support to help us do what we do and chime in for our live streams as well. So that's another way to help support and help us improve our coverage. So that's tips.nasaspaceflight.com. And a big thank you. We've gotten a couple of tips over the course of today's broadcast, so we appreciate those who have done so. On that front, I do believe we are reaching the final end of this test, wouldn't you say, Alex?
Yeah, and maybe Patrick, can you change to the camera? There we go. So I wanted to make a clarification here because I was actually talking a bit here and looking at the tank farm activity over the past two hours. And I will like to make a clarification here and a statement, so to speak. I do not think now that they have loaded methane onto the booster. So we're seeing there are venting going on at the tank farm on one of the tanks. The tank is for liquid nitrogen. And what they're doing right now is venting the tank as they're draining back that liquid nitrogen from the methane tank of the booster. They're loading it back to the ground systems, and so they need to be able to vent the same way that they have vented the booster as they were loading it. The same way it's backwards now. The ground tanks are also being vented as they load back that propellant into the ground tanks. And so the reason why I'm saying this, I was talking a bit here with other folks, ring watchers in this case, with Jax, and we're talking sort of the activity of the methane subcoolers and the methane subcoolers. They were going ham on like very like minutes before they started loading the methane tank, and that confused me, thinking that they were actually loading methane because they were very, very active at that moment. But it seems like it is indeed liquid nitrogen rather than liquid methane what they have loaded on the methane tank of the booster. And that sort of explains why the village was not evacuated today, because we've seen that in the previous testing that we've seen with a full wet dress rehearsal, they evacuated the village, they left everything everyone evacuate for safety reasons, and that sort of explains why that is not the case today. But nonetheless, it is very exciting. They did another test of the booster with full load of liquid oxygen. They did full load of liquid nitrogen as well on the methane tank, which, by the way, it is heavier because it's more dense than methane. So that means it actually is heavier than it will be if it had been methane. So, something extra, something different. But as they get prepared for that flight, it is very important that they, exercise all of these, timings and loadings and everything. So it is pretty much something very important to do ahead of that launch.
Interesting. So I know earlier in the day we were looking at some of the ground support equipment spooling up, and we saw the subcoolers active for both propellants, which is why we were originally speculating that it was methane and liquid oxygen. Do you think they did load liquid oxygen though, and it was just nitrogen in the methane tank? Is that our
Yeah,
guess
liquid
there?
oxygen and liquid nitrogen. Liquid oxygen on the
Yeah,
liquid
okay.
oxygen tank, and then liquid nitrogen on the methane tank. Yep.
And that does explain why there wasn't a big evacuation notice or anything, even though they were loading fully the booster with both propellants, because it was actually nitrogen. And that's, again, watching the ground support equipment is the only way to really get some good information on that, because, again, we don't get official information on that front. So that's what it's looking like. And again, maybe SpaceX will offer more info once the test is completely finished. But they are into detanking now. It appears to have gone smoothly regardless of what they were loading. It went pretty smoothly, and they're back into detanking now. And so, Alex, thank you for offering your analysis there. Also, Nick, thank you so much for joining our live coverage here as the resident local. I'm just going to keep calling you that on these streams. As the local Starbase
No.
photojournalist.
Mary
of
is
many
the
other
local.
things.
Mary is
That's
the
true.
local.
Mary is the original local. That's a very good point.
I just moved down here.
I just moved here for the Rockets. But appreciate you regardless joining our coverage today, Nick. Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Happy to join.
And folks, what we're going to do now, of course, there are a couple ways you can continue watching our Starbase news coverage. We do have a new Starbase update video, which I believe is pinned in chat, and our mods will go ahead and show the link in chat as well. there's that classic thumbnail featuring the retro
no.
NSF merch.
You know
So
what?
definitely, if you want to, oh, go
You
ahead.
know, you know what? People should go and like on the comments leave like a note of, "Hey, I come here from the
Yes,
spelling test,
absolutely.
and Nick, reminder to update your merch."
There you
Go
go.
there and leave it there.
If
And
you go to
Emma,
the update video from here, definitely leave that comment.
I don't want to spoil the whole video, but if you guys want to see behind the scenes content on how the daily clips are collected out at Starbase every day, definitely you're going to want to go watch the Starbase update video, because I might have pointed a camera at myself as I was doing a little bit of work. So you guys might
you go.
enjoy that.
Perfect. And of course, you want to keep track as SpaceX finishes up the detanking operations after today's day of Booster 7 testing. There are, of course, 24/7 live views of Starbase on Starbase Live here on the YouTube channel. But as SpaceX does wrap up their testing, we are also going to wrap up our dedicated live coverage. So, on behalf of the NSF team, my name is Thomas Berger. Thank you, everyone, for sending support and for tuning in and chatting with us today. Again, head over to the update video to catch up on the latest from Starbase, and head over to Starbase Live for continuing 24/7 coverage from Starbase, Texas, as SpaceX works closer and closer to the orbital flight test. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. We will see you all next time. Later, nerds.